Welcome to podcast number 3 of Bass Talk with Hagen and Hayes. Today's topic is standing or sitting with a double bass. So, Susan Hagen, do you always sit to play?
That's such a good question, David Hayes.
Mhm.
um, I used to only sit to play, but
Right.
when I teach, I find that I stand a lot. Just
Mm.
it's just easier for space. When I started playing bass, I stood all the time, and as a kid, I had scoliosis. So
Right.
for people who don't know that, that's a curvature of the spine. And as I got older, it got quite severe.
Right.
And I would have muscle spasms in my back. And it was not bass related,
Mm.
it was just life related. And I found that sitting relieved the stress on my legs. And so my back stayed nice and loose. So I started sitting probably about a year or two after I started playing the bass. And I stayed sitting. I had non-bass related, the scoliosis
Mm.
issue was a challenge through my entire, well, life. It was definitely, I had surgery for it when I was in high school. So it
Yeah.
definitely impacted a lot of my just day to day things that I did. So I sat, and I found that when I sat, I was super comfortable. The only time my back didn't hurt was when I was playing the bass. The rest of my day, my back was very uncomfortable. Um, so I still sit. I know it means lugging a stool, which seems so dumb. It seems like a waste of energy and it's another thing to carry, and it makes putting things in my car even bulkier. But I just did so much of my what I consider my formative training in college while sitting. And what was interesting is I'm thinking back, every student when I was in college and in grad school, every student in my teacher's studio, we all sat.
I think it was the
And
same for us. I
yeah.
started playing, I sat,
Hmm.
and this was the mid 1970s. And at that time, Gary Carr was just coming on the scene. And in Britain, almost everyone sat and used French bow. And suddenly there was this American chap coming who stood to play and used a German bow. And it was like chalk and cheese. It was unbelievable.
Yeah.
It was like the devil incarnate in Britain. It was unreal, really, because all the ones who sat and used French bow were right, and everybody else who stood and used German bow were wrong.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
so it was quite strange. But I was thinking about this when I was thinking about what we're going to talk about today. And I
Hmm.
suddenly remembered that when I started to play, I sat as well, because I think my
Ah,
teacher sat. But
yep.
I've gone through sitting, standing, sitting, standing, sitting, standing,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
now I only stand.
Hmm.
But my students do both. I try and get them to learn both, because if you're sitting, you don't understand the balance of the bass.
Right.
When you're standing, you have to learn about the balance of the bass. Otherwise,
Yeah.
it's very difficult to play. And I think it's good to have the choice of both. But
Right.
I remember what you mean about carrying a stool around. It is
Yeah.
something else to carry.
Another thing
Um,
to lug.
it is, and it's. I can understand why people stand. But if you're in an orchestra and you've got a 3 hour rehearsal or 6 hour rehearsal,
Oh yeah.
only an idiot would stand for 6 hours.
And
It
I
makes
think
sense,
that's,
doesn't it?
yeah, I think that's part of why, at least in America, when I was going through school, everyone sat because we were all training to be orchestral players. So
Mm.
why would you stand? And I remember one day I went to see Ed Barker, my teacher, play chamber music, and he was standing. And
Right.
I almost keeled over because, he sat for everything.
Yes.
And I remember thinking, what is he doing? And I talked to him afterwards. I said, "Oh, so I noticed you're standing." And he was like, "Yeah, I think it's good. I think my body, likes just having a different way of playing." But I
Yes.
remembered then that he would experiment with stool heights, or
Mhm.
is the seat of the stool tilted forward a little bit to make him sit up better. Which is why, most of my students at Berkeley, I'd say 98% of them stand, which is
Yes.
part of why I don't mind standing when I teach, because I can, like you say, talk about balancing the bass and how to use my body to get around and to help support the bass so my left hand isn't doing all the work. But also, a lot of my students will play gigs where there's not a lot of physical space.
Yes. Yeah.
And being able to stand definitely cuts down on how much space you need, your footprint, if you were on
Yeah.
stage. So I think for them, it's practical, you know. I also remember, I don't know if you ever ran into this because you didn't, you go through the phases. Sitting, oh, the stool had to be like an exact height for a long time for me. And it was really hard. So I would have to bring my own stool. And I would go to Symphony Hall to take lessons in Boston.
Mm.
And I'd bring my own stool. And finally, I think I was playing for Larry Wolf at the time. And he said to me, Susan, I don't get it. Why are you bringing your stool? I said, well, it's mine and it's the right height. And he looked at me, he's like, okay, it's time to add a little flexibility into your life here. So I stopped bringing a stool to Symphony Hall, which there's like 25 or 30 stools just sitting around the building, probably more actually. And so I would grab one that looked close-ish to the height that
Yes.
I liked so that it's not like 3 inches off. But
Yes.
I realized we have this wonderful thing on our bases called an end pin. You
Who
can
would have thought
adjust
it?
the height. And that made me realize for my standing students too, little bit, this happens with the boys, but it also happens more, I think, with the girls. Heel height of your shoes
Yes.
impacts how you're approaching the instrument. And I always make sure to point out to my students, if you're wearing higher heels, and
Mm.
boys' sneakers can be this way too. They're almost like on a higher platform. It's like, look at it, and you might need to bop your end pin out. Most of my students have the end pins with the notches,
Yes.
but I have end pins with no notches, and it's
Mhm.
just like a little clamp to close it, so I can
Yes.
put it anywhere I want. I really like
Yeah.
that. But you've got to be aware when you're sitting and standing. Do you come into this where you've got to think about the height of the base if your shoes are different?
All the time. And I say this to students because sometimes a student will arrive and they've got school uniform on.
Right.
Sometimes they're going to games or PE afterwards
Hmm.
so that they're already ready. So they're wearing different shoes.
Right.
And then they put the base at the normal height and suddenly it's the wrong height. And you
Yeah.
have to explain that it does change because of what you're wearing. But I
Right.
remember when I was in Prague with František Pošta, he always said, sit in the orchestra and stand for solos. And
Mm.
I thought that was really, really good advice. But then I remembered that in England, somebody, I think in London, somebody had said, well, all the notes are different. They're all in different places. And I thought, oh, yeah, they're right. And then afterwards, I thought, well, you could practice a bit harder and you could
Right.
practice standing and sitting. And so you know where they are. And then you have a choice.
Yeah.
But it was amazing with Gary Carr because Gary came in and I loved everything that he was doing because he was different.
Right.
And when I remember when we were sitting, the bass sat on you and that was it. It didn't move.
Mm.
But then the one thing I've realized is really you're almost as flexible sitting as standing
Yeah.
if you want to be. If you
Yes.
want the bass just to sit there, it will sit there. If you want
Right.
to have movement, you can
Yep.
still move even if you're sitting.
Yes.
And that's the nice thing. And the one thing I always tell my students is it doesn't matter whether you stand or sit, French bow, German bow player, you can either play in tune or you can't. It makes
Right.
no difference at all.
Yep.
But
Yep.
I do understand about sitting in an orchestra. Years ago, I once heard a Russian orchestra who came to London,
Mm-hmm.
and half the basses sat and half them stood. Um,
Mm.
so I would have put all the sitters at the front row and all the standers at the back, but they didn't. They're
Right.
interspersed. So and it looked really quite untidy.
Yeah.
They played magnificently, but it didn't look good.
Sure.
And if all the basses are sitting, it does look quite impressive.
It
Uh,
does. It does. We in the Boston Symphony there's one fellow who stands, but he's on the end of the first row usually. From the audience's perspective, you can't really notice the difference because he and his stand partner sits, but they look great together, so you can't notice
mhm,
the difference. And everyone else sits.
yes.
But that's one of the things that you were just mentioning, flexibility. I
Mm,
remember that I came into school in college and I was very stiff when I sat. I thought I had to sit
mm,
incredibly still, um, because people would make fun of bass players who emoted too much when they played, and they made like, you needed a wingspan of like maybe 12 feet in each direction
You're
for
not
this.
paying me enough money to emote.
Exactly. But I realized a couple of things would happen. You get stiff and
Mm,
tight if you're not moving. And I thought, well, that's
yes,
not how I am. I move a little bit. But it took me a while to find the balance of, am I sitting and moving the bass? Is the bass still? Is my body moving?
mm,
But I remember I had played a St. Matthew's Passion, which is very, very long, 3 hour long piece. And an older gentleman, once again, came up to me at the end of the concert and he said, I loved watching you play. It
yes.
looked like a ballerina. And I immediately thought, wait a second. He didn't say you sounded good. And ballerinas, oh gosh, maybe I'm moving too much. And
Yes.
so I went home that day and I started analyzing, as I tend to overthink. I thought, am I moving my body to try to shape the phrase? If
Yes.
someone isn't watching, are they hearing the phrase or are
Mm,
they only seeing it from the way I move? So I made sure I sort of redid how I move, how I sit, and making sure that the musicality is coming from my bass. But
mm,
the bass moves. I move myself, but it's not like showy, dancy, look at me, I'm shaping a phrase. But it's more like keeping my body loose
yes.
and, not stiff. Now, do you find when you stand and you're playing for long periods of time, does your body get stiff or tired?
No, I think probably I've done it for so long.
That
That
makes sense.
it's okay. And when I teach, I start teaching at something like 8 in the morning, and I might go on until 4:30 or 5 o'clock. And I've been standing up for a lot of that time. But there's a piano stool. I play the piano a lot with my students, and
Sure.
sometimes I just sit on the piano stool and have
Nice.
the bass sort of sitting out in front of me.
Hmm.
And I can still play it as long as the end pin goes into the carpet, so the
Right.
bass doesn't move. I can still play a lot of the things to
Yeah.
demonstrate what I'm doing. So I'm standing and sitting all the time. But I've got
Yeah.
some students who have always sat and are really happy. And I've got some who have always stood and are really happy. But
Right.
I think there's a happy medium.
Hmm.
Um, and I think if you're going to become an orchestral player, you have to learn to sit because the the rehearsals aren't very, very long. I'm lucky that my rehearsals are never 3 hours long. It's really, it's much easier for me.
Yeah.
Um, it's much easier. And I'm not standing for such a long space of time.
Right.
But yeah, but you do get older, and there are more aches and pains as you get older. And
Yes.
I enjoyed sitting. I enjoyed. Um, yeah, it was different because I enjoyed the flexibility because I think I always moved anyway when I played,
Yeah.
so that didn't stop me. But for some reason I've come back to standing, and I sort of haven't gone back.
Now, when you stand and you talk to a student about how to balance the bass,
Hmm,
what's your advice? Because I think, a lot of people use bent end pins and things like that now, but
hmm,
I still think for those of us that don't, well, how
hmm.
do you tell them to make sure that they're not just sort of holding the bass up with their left hand?
Oh, it's interesting. I had one student who was she had a Francois Rabat end pin, which is
Yes.
the curved end pin, and I couldn't play the bass because I couldn't like
The balance is so
oh,
different.
I went to his apartment years ago. We went out for dinner. I was doing a masterclass at Paris Conservatoire, and I went
Hmm.
out for dinner with Francois Rabat and Thierry Barbet.
Nice.
And before that, we went to Francois's apartment, and he's showing me this new end pin.
Yeah.
And I remember that the balance of the bass, it felt like there was no weight to the bass at all. It was
Yeah.
unbelievable. It was fantastic. But I
Yeah.
think you have to get used to it. So
You do.
so with Connie, I used to say, you'll have to hold the bass for me because the bass used to move when I was trying to play her bass. But the balance thing is a really good one. And you just learn just by doing it, and you feel it's sort of upright-ish,
Hmm.
but it can't be upright. And if the weight is too far one way and then it falls too quickly, then it's wrong. There
Right.
should be a space where you just got a couple of seconds just before. And if you've got that couple of seconds, it's about right. But then also, then moving into thumb position, then
Right.
you then have to pull the bass back so that you
Back
move
into you.
into thumb position and then move
Yeah.
back. Um,
Yeah.
but I like teaching the freedom, and I
Yeah.
get students playing high much earlier than ever I was taught.
Hmm.
but the balance of it, I love it. And I never even think, but I spend a lot of time teaching students where to stand with the bass and how the
Yeah.
bass sits with it. And somebody once said to me, it should be like a milking stool. They always have three
Mm,
legs. And if you
yeah.
have a stool which has three legs, it balances. If you have a stool which has two legs, it doesn't balance.
No.
And that's always the thing is you've got your two legs and the end pin. And as long as the balance
Interesting.
is give or take right, it's
Yeah.
okay. But again, I've had pupils who stand behind the bass
Right.
um, because they're not really balancing it properly.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And that you can't do it. It's
Right.
but there's a play, and then another student who stands too far around the bass. So
Right.
therefore, he can't play at the heel of the bow because his arm won't let him. You know,
Yes.
they all have to learn all these
Right.
things.
Yeah.
But sitting, I did enjoy for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah. I have I have a class that's called Elementary Bass
Right.
at Berkeley, and it's for mostly electric players, although I'll get
Mm,
a guitar player or a singer on occasion too. And they want to learn to play double bass, but they haven't had a ton of experience, sometimes none,
mm,
which I actually don't mind because they're adults. I can talk to them very high level of intelligence, which is
yes.
great. Um, but they also don't have bad habits yet, which I kind of like.
Yes.
But I do this little thing where I say, like, you want it, we call it upright bass, but it can't be upright 90 degrees. It's
Yes.
got to lean in towards you. And then I speak about the body a little bit, and I always sort of warn them. I say, okay, now I'm going to talk about bodies. So don't get freaked out. But you want the corner, like the shoulder of the bass, the corner of it, to lean in towards your belly. And for me, if you look at where your belly button is, for me, it's a little bit to the left of my belly button. For you, it might be a little to the right. It doesn't matter. It's going to be
Mhm.
somewhere around there. And then we talk about, your shoulders can't, your feet need to be sort of level with where your shoulders, not way far apart, not super
Yes.
close to each other. And so I get kind of specific with them. And then we talk about thumb position and how to get in and out. And yeah, like you said, moving the bass closer in towards
Yes.
you. And
Mm.
I make them laugh, but I use a bad word. I say but. I say to
That's
them, you
exactly what
keep,
I was thinking about as you were saying that.
and I explain, you want to keep your feet where they are, kind of move your butt back a little bit
Yeah.
and have the bass come in towards you. And the bass does the work that way. And then you stand back up and you know, you want to keep your back straight no matter what. You're not going to be hunched and crouched over, but then you bring your butt and your stomach forward to come out of thumb position so that it's like a gradual transition. And when
And
I
that's the
say to them now,
difficulty, the gradual.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, it's the gradual because a lot of them will sort of get to like an F sharp and then they lunge. And
That's it.
so
That's
we
it.
work on these sort of in and out of thumb position pieces. In fact, that is one of the things that I had you create because, scales are great. Scales are important. Arpeggios are crucial, all of that. But I remember being a student and thinking, well, I can do my scales in and out of thumb position, but I can't play my music.
Yes.
And I thought, my God, what do I do? So as a teacher, I found that to be very frustrating. So I asked you to write some music.
Mm.
You wrote the collection Scaling the Heights to
Yes.
go from what I call the danger zone, that region right before thumb position, into thumb position and back. And it's great. The students love it. The music, they're short pieces that they can learn in a week. So they feel like they've achieved something. It's not like, oh, hey, let's learn the Botticini elegy. This
Mm.
week you've never come in and out of thumb position in anything but a scale, so have fun, which was what happened to me. That's
I
how
loved
I learned.
writing. I really enjoyed writing them. And once
The
I'd worked out it was every major and minor key, I
Yeah,
knew what I was doing.
that
Um,
book is awesome.
Thank you. But it's nice as well that sometimes you can play across the string. You stay in thumb position
Yes.
to play
Yep.
an F. Sometimes you come back to play an F. And
Right.
it's interesting to teach students how to where you're going to play an F and why you're going to play
Right.
the F.
How to make that decision.
And I've
Um,
just done that with the Hairful pieces I've written because they
nice.
got in and out of thumb position.
Yes.
It's like an extension of scaling the heights.
In fact, that's how I used it this past
Yeah.
semester. It
Mm,
was great. They'd do some scaling the heights, and then I'd give them a hurdle piece,
mm,
which was also they loved because there was then a piano accompaniment.
yes.
So
Mm,
then there was a collaboration, and those are so well written too.
thank you.
Sweet.
I've enjoyed writing them. Whenever I write, certainly if it's for younger players, which these were sort of some of my younger players. The idea was there's always an educational aspect to them.
Yes.
And I think it's important. But I was talking to a student the other day about this. I tried to make sure that I had hidden the technical issues within the music,
Yes.
so they don't know they're learning about
Yep.
positions and shifting and moving in and out of thumb position, and bow control and numbers of notes per bow and all these things.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
but it's still there.
I think the hope is if we as teachers do it right, learn the pieces and scaling the heights, they're going
Mm,
to have the technique to now get in and out of thumb position. Give
yes,
them the Sweet and Bohemia. Is that what that collection is
Sweet and
called?
Bohemia. Yes,
Yes.
yeah,
Give them that. Now it's music. They've
yes,
got the technical chops. They might not be like completely 100% reinforced because they're new. So
yes.
these pieces can help reinforce that technique in with music with beautiful pieces. I have to say those
Thank
pieces are
you.
gorgeous. And then when they get through those two things, the Scaling the Heights collection and the Sweet and Bohemia, they should be pretty unstoppable. But
Yes.
you do a great job of hiding it. No one's going to think, oh God, here comes that hard shift. They're going to be like, oh, this is that beautiful part where it just wants to sing.
But everything I'm thinking about with those, I'm thinking in terms of scales and arpeggios and positions,
Yeah.
and where you move up the string, where you move across the string. So but as I said, I try to hide the fact.
Yeah.
And the Suite in Bohemia, I'm really happy with. It's quite a few of my students are playing them. Izzy, I wrote a legend for her, and
Hmm.
she's premiering that I think on the 4th of June, and she loves it.
Nice.
But she's an ex-cellist, so straight away she's still playing with. It's still a cello feel. She's not quite a bass player yet,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
she's had to learn to reduce the number of notes per handshake.
Right.
Because being a
Right.
cellist, you have a sort of perfect fourth at least in your handshake. Now she
Yeah.
has just a tone, a step, which is
it's
completely different.
it's quite a
Uh,
shock for cellists.
it is, but she's suddenly understanding how to really make the bass sing, which is nice. And you were talking earlier about carrying a stool
Yeah.
with a bass, which I remember doing, oh wow, many, many times. But I suppose the thing is, if you're starting to play the bass, you know it's big and cumbersome and you need a big car,
Yeah.
and you probably have to carry a stool as well. And
Right.
if you don't want any of those problems, don't play the bass.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things. My argument was in for penny, in for pound. I've got a big instrument. What's it matter if I'm carrying something else? And I used
Exactly.
to joke, oh, well, I carry the bass on my left shoulder. Like, I have a wheel, and then I've got the
Yes.
stool in my right hand. And I always joke, I say, it evens me out, which is a big lie. It just means I'm carrying something else. And now my husband laughs and he's like, I know you're lying. I'm taking your stool. But,
all my students, all my
yeah,
students have wheels,
yes.
because where the school is, it's on many different sites.
Hmm.
Where my teaching room is nowhere near the concert hall or the
Right,
small concert hall,
right.
and they've got lots of cobbles because it's an old city,
Yeah.
and so they have wheels, which
Yeah.
means carrying a stool is no effort at all.
It's really
We
not a big
we didn't have
deal.
stool wheels in my day.
Well, you know what? We had them, but they were only for kids that were big babies. And, we'd joke like, oh, you have a wheel. Life must be tough. And it was bad. It was like this macho thing. If you carried your bass, you were a real bass player. And now I think, people are really more into body awareness and
Yes,
yoga and Pilates and body mapping and all these things where we just don't want to damage our bodies doing something that we
yes.
could avoid. But it's true, a wheel makes the base quite transportable. It's just not a big deal.
And
Um,
they're not expensive. I just give
no.
a link on the internet and get people to buy them.
Yes.
And they put the wheels on. It takes them 20 seconds.
Yeah,
It's
it's
just
worth
so
it.
simple, and they just all walk up and down wells with these basses. It's
Right.
amazing. And but
Yep.
that's the thing about being a bass player is you just get on with it.
You
It's
do.
I think we've got no choice. If you
Yeah.
want to play the bass, often you're going to have to carry a stool. As a stander, I love it that I don't have to carry a stool. I have to say, um, yeah, I do feel quite good. The problem I have then with the standing is you have to make sure that the floor is okay, because
Yes.
if the balance of the bass moves slightly, suddenly the bass sort of falls away from you.
Right,
So if
right.
I'm playing in a church, I always have to take a small carpet with me because I don't know
Ah,
if it's going to be carpet on the floor. I don't know if
right.
it's going to be wood. I don't know if it's going
Yeah.
to be cement or
Right, right.
anything. I have no idea. So I always take
Yeah,
something with me
that's
uh,
smart.
just to make sure.
My
Um,
end pin,
mm,
it's a carbide tip.
right.
So it's like carbon fiber with titanium. It's all these great things. It stabs into everything and it stabs into things it shouldn't. But
Yes.
I can hold a grip on a cement marble, although I really don't want to because it
Yeah.
usually means I'm in a church and I don't want to like deface the
Yes.
place. But it will stab and hold into absolutely any surface, which the reason why I like that is when I play out at Tanglewood with the Boston Symphony, the stage there, there are risers and the bases are
Yes.
on risers, and I don't know what they're made of, but it's very slippery. It's
Mm,
looks like wood, but it does not respond to an end pin the way
really.
it would. And so we used to all have like rock stops or the anchors that attach to the bottom of the stool.
Yes.
And when I found these end pins, Dennis Roy helped me find it. I said to him, I can stab into that stage at Tanglewood. You know, when the bass slips and you're sitting, it whacks your collarbone
It does.
and it
It does.
hurts. And I know when you're standing and it slips, it's a disaster too. So I love having this end pin. I can just sort of jab it in and I'm good to go. We also, with the Boston Pops Esplanade, when we're touring, sometimes we play in like hockey arenas and we bring our own
Right.
stage, and I know it's not plastic but it feels like plastic, and
Yes.
it's textured, and everyone's end pins slip, and so we'll ask for like gaff tape and they put an X and people stab into that. But
I
with
was
my
disappointed
carbide,
when you said there was a stage. I
I know.
just imagined you all go around on the ice.
On the ice. Well, there's oftentimes ice underneath us, and man, it's cold.
I bet. I
It's
bet.
really bad. But with my carbide tip on my end pin, I just go boop, and it does. I don't even have to shove it in. I just a
Mm.
gentle put it onto the stage, and I'm good to go. I can even, unfortunately, spin my bass safely, which is one of those things that happens. Which I have a love-hate relationship with the spinning, but that's a story for another day.
Yeah, I try not to spin my bass, and I try to persuade my students not to, because it only goes one way, if I'm honest.
Oh, we've this might be a future podcast. We have had spinning moments. Oh, so many different things can go wrong. But the crowd can love it, and when it's an orchestra like the Boston Pops, they're going to be into it, but that's a topic for
I
another
think when
day.
we come over to Boston next year, I think we're going to have to
Hmm.
practice us swinging our basses around.
Oh yeah, I can teach you that.
Thank
I should actually teach a class of that because I actually am the Boston Pops award-winning bass spinner. It's like
no.
oh yes, even when I'm playing with the Boston Symphony, like Boston
Hmm.
Pops at
Yes,
Symphony Hall. It's kind of a little joke, faster and longer than the guys.
I think I'm
So,
too serious for you, Susan Hagen.
oh, I think you are. That's why I need you to keep me serious. But, oh, and there was another thing you were talking about. So, the Francois Rabath end
Hmm.
pins. One of my students said to me what he liked about it was that it feels like you're sitting the way the bass balances on your
Hmm.
body, but you're standing. So he loved not having to carry a stool. But every time I played his bass, I was afraid I was going to drop it because when I stand, I
Yes,
approach the bass a certain way.
yes.
And when I sit, it's different, and to combine those two. But I find that there are some people that love it. Now there are also some people that sit with the Rabath end pin.
I haven't seen that, but I
Hmm.
have. But the Rabat Enpin is it is like standing and sitting at the same time, which I
Yeah,
think is one of the benefits of it. It's
I think it's great.
you're standing, you still got the freedom, but it feels like you also have the security of sitting.
Yeah, yeah, and
But
it's
I've seen
funny.
a friend of mine, Alberto Boccini.
Mm.
I don't know if he has a Rabat Enpin, but I think when he plays, he sits on a piano stool, really
Ah,
quite
okay.
low.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's interesting because when they first started to become popular,
Hmm.
those Rabath end pins, people in Boston were thinking, oh, this is a shortcut so that you don't have to practice as much.
Yes,
And
yes.
I said to a couple of the people that were saying that, I said, is it possible that because, let's be honest, the bass is bulky, it's
Hmm.
kind of big and awkward. I love it, but it's a little bit of a beast.
Yes.
what if this is making it physically more comfortable for more people to be playing our instrument and therefore making it better? Because if more people play it,
Mm,
there's the odds of great players increases. And
exactly.
I don't think it's a shortcut at all. I think it's opening the instrument up to people that maybe physically weren't comfortable playing it, and now they are.
Well, Francois is amazing. He's amazing because he solved all these problems he didn't know were problems.
Yeah.
Because he didn't have a teacher, he just had a tutor. So he just worked out how to do it his own way, the best way, and he
Yes.
discovered this way. And it's amazing how the system has gone all over the world. And I'm always a great believer in anything that's new. If it's good, it will survive, and if not, it'll fall by the wayside, as it
Exactly.
always has done.
Yes.
And I think this one is a stayer. I think this one is there's a lot for this one. I think I'm too old, if I'm honest, to want to change it.
I don't
But
know that if it's that you're too old. It could just be that you're so accustomed to playing the way you
yeah,
are.
it's I'm sure I could get used to it, but I
Yeah.
think at this stage of my life, I think I
Don't
don't.
want
I
to.
but I can see the benefits of it, and
Yeah.
I hear many great players who do it and really
Yeah.
swear by it. So it's and anything that which I think makes our life better and easier is great.
Hmm.
I have no problem with anything.
Yeah.
And standing and sitting, it's in wow, in the 1970s there used to be so many arguments
Oh
about,
yeah.
and it's always from the sitters of why they were right and everybody else was wrong. And I think that's why I became a bit more liberal about everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of my teachers was called Gray, Lawrence Gray, really great chap. And he always said, be like me, be grey, not black or white. And I
There
said, yeah,
you
black
go.
and white creates wars. The grey in the
Yeah.
middle, yeah, we all get on. And I always remembered that. I thought, yeah, and there's space for all of us. And because you want to sit and I want to stand, it doesn't mean either of us is right.
Right.
We're both right.
Yeah.
It's
I
right for
really
us.
I agree with this. I think there's no wrong answer.
Mm,
There's the right answer for you.
yes.
And
Mm,
whatever makes us comfortable
mm,
is great. It's the way to do it. And I'm a lot like you. I kind of live in the gray because I
mm,
don't think that I'm right. I think I'm right for me. I
yes.
like I like sitting. I like French bow for me, but it doesn't mean I don't play German bow. It doesn't mean I don't stand. It's just this is how I'm most comfortable performing, and I don't try to convert my students to play the way I play. I want to find the way that's comfortable for them and makes them play their best. And
That's
I
right.
kind of
That's a good
think
way.
that's the important thing. It's
Mm.
each one of us has a right answer for us.
I think that's a good way of looking at it. And it's finding what's the right answer for you.
Yeah,
But I still think sitting in the orchestra makes sense. I
I think so.
understand that completely. It
I think
doesn't make sense to stand for 6 hours a day.
I don't think so. I think it's just hard on everything, your feet included, you know?
Exactly. Now
Um,
I'm so old. Maybe I should go back to sitting.
well, none of us are getting any younger, so, but I think this is great. So, it's not a right answer one way or the other. I think you find what's best for you. And I love it. I think that's great. Sitting and standing. There is no
Well,
wrong answer.
I think we've sorted that one out, Susan Hagen.
Perfect, David Hayes. Well, thank you everybody for listening to Bass Talk with Hagen and Hayes, episode 3. Would you like to be our sponsor? If so, reach out. We'd love that. And everyone else, we would love to meet you again on our next podcast. Stay well.
Bye.